In the heart of New York City, specifically in the East Village, a unique temple emerged in the late 20th century, named the True Inner Light Temple. This temple does not raise the usual prayers, nor does it adopt traditional religious symbols. Instead, it is founded on a radically unfamiliar belief that hallucinogenic substances such as DPT, LSD, and DMT are not merely tools for meditation or enlightenment, but actual embodiments of the divine in a chemical form. This belief came as an extension and distortion of an older religious idea that appeared in some spiritual movements, where mind-altering substances were seen as a means to reach advanced states of consciousness. However, in the case of this temple, drugs were no longer a means, but became the end itself, considered the true form of divine light. The existence of this temple raised profound questions. Can this practice be considered a true religion, or is it just a cover to justify drug use? And how did the authorities handle a group that claimed that sacred chemical substances were the divine itself? This video tells the complete story of the True Inner Light Temple, from its founding, to its rituals, to its legal confrontations, and even its near disappearance from the public scene. It is a tale that reveals how a small idea can evolve into a mysterious religious cult, and how some people redefine the meaning of sacred within a chemical molecule. Stay with us until the end, and don't forget to support us by liking the video and subscribing to the channel for all the latest updates. The roots of the True Inner Light Temple trace back to an older religious movement, the Native American Church, which was officially founded in the early 20th century. This church allowed the use of the peyote plant in its rituals as a means of connecting with the Holy Spirit. On the margins, many splinter groups emerged, some of which adopted more radical ideas about the relationship between drugs and religious experience. Among these splinter groups, a small group in New York emerged, led by a man named Alan Birnbaum. Birnbaum was a controversial figure, influenced by the spiritual currents of the 1970s and the growing popularity of hallucinogenic substances within cultural and artistic circles. Rather than seeing drugs as a means or tool, Birnbaum introduced a new idea. The drug itself is the deity. Birnbaum and his followers chose a chemical substance known as dipropyltryptamine, DPT, to be the focus of their rituals. This substance was developed in laboratories in the 1950s and was not as widely known as LSD. For the temple members, DPT was not just a psychoactive compound, but a direct embodiment of what they described as the inner light. In the early 1980s, the temple settled in the East Village, a neighborhood famous for its alternative culture and marginalized communities. The area was home to artists, musicians, and activists, as well as quirky small shops. In the midst of this environment, the temple opened its headquarters in a modest storefront, with a facade no different from any other shop, without any clear religious symbols or architectural features suggesting it was a temple. However, inside, it offered what could be described as a mass that was completely different. The temple clearly declared itself as an independent religion, with its own writings, beliefs, and rituals. One of the most important statements in their documents was that God is the drug itself, and that substances like DPT, LSD, and DMT were not symbols or means, but the divine entity manifested. The split from the Native American Church was decisive. While the latter relied on sacred plants, with a long history in indigenous cultures, the True Inner Light Temple decided that the path to the divine did not only pass through nature, but could also be created in laboratories. This shift from traditional spirituality to industrial chemistry marked a pivotal moment in the temple's identity. By the end of the 1980s, the temple had become known in the small circles of New York as one of the most unusual religious experiments. For some, it was simply a drug hideout, while for others, it was a unique spiritual experience. This foundational stage laid the groundwork for the controversy that would later surround the temple, with some seeing it as a spiritual innovation and others viewing it as a mere deviation. Since its inception, the True Inner Light Temple has declared that it does not treat drugs as tools or means, but as God itself. In their published statements, they emphasize that substances such as DPT, LSD, and DMT are not just materials that open the doors of perception, but a direct embodiment of what they called divine light. The temple did not create its religion out of thin air. The central idea within it reinterpreted the Christian sacrament. In Christianity, bread and wine are considered symbols of the body and blood of Christ. However, in the True Inner Light Temple, the sacrament transformed into a dose of a chemical substance. Inhaling or ingesting DPT was the central ritual they practiced. For them, this was not a metaphor, but a true encounter with God in the form of a chemical molecule. Their rituals were simple in appearance. Inside the small headquarters in the East Village, members would gather in small groups. The DPT powder was prepared or dissolved into a solution, then inhaled or ingested in specific doses. The session was conducted with a clear religious spirit. Silence, sometimes reading from texts written by the temple's founders, and repeated references to the inner light that appeared when the substance entered the body. The followers believed that the moment of taking the dose was the moment of union with the divine. In testimonies later published online, some described the experience as a direct taste of the absolute truth, while others compared it to opening a gateway between the ordinary and the sacred. The temple did not limit itself to DPT alone. Its religious texts also referenced other substances such as LSD and DMT, considering them different forms of divine manifestation. However, DPT remained the central substance, as it was the least known and most closely associated with the identity of the group. The rituals did not last for long hours. The sessions were usually short and intense, but for the followers, they were equivalent to a full sacrament. There were no priests in the traditional sense, but members took turns leading the rituals. In this way, the temple broke the traditional hierarchical structure, making every participant a direct partner in the encounter with God. For the neighbors or outside observers, there were no loud displays. Anyone walking by the shop would not notice anything unusual. But inside the simple walls, the followers believed that what they were practicing was the pinnacle of sanctity, a direct encounter with the divine light that resides in a chemical substance. From the outside, the True Inner Light Temple appeared to be nothing more than a small shop on a side street in the East Village of New York. A modest facade, a simple wooden door, and a plain sign that didn't attract attention. But inside this place, one of the strangest forms of worship in America was taking place. Daily life in the temple was not as organized as in traditional churches. There was no fixed schedule for prayers, but times were arranged by small groups of followers. Upon entering, they would find a modest room with simple seating and a small table with the necessary tools, tubes, DPT powder, or a solution prepared for inhalation. The sessions were typically held in a calm atmosphere. No loud music, no dramatic rituals, just deliberate silence before the moment of consuming the sacrament. One of the members would read texts written by the founders, reaffirming the central idea: the drug is God. Afterward, participants would take their dose and sit in deep contemplation. Although the temple did not have large numbers, its presence left an impression on its surroundings. Some neighbors described its visitors as quiet strangers, entering and exiting the shop quickly, without causing any trouble. But others thought the activity was suspicious, especially with rumors circulating about the distribution of hallucinogenic substances inside the place. The press that visited the temple in the 1980s reported similar details. UPI news agency reports and local newspapers described the place as a mix between a shop and a shrine. For the journalists, the scene seemed like a mini-religious experience taking place in the heart of a bustling city. The temple did not limit itself to just internal rituals. Sometimes, It distributed short leaflets explaining its philosophy, asserting that God could manifest in any chemical substance with a hallucinogenic nature. These leaflets were occasionally found in neighborhood cafes or with individuals who wanted to promote the idea outside the temple's walls. Despite the simplicity of daily life within, the temple was surrounded by an aura of mystery. There were no large advertisements or attempts to attract large crowds. It seemed that the goal was not widespread expansion, but to maintain a small core of believers practicing their rituals away from the spotlight. Nonetheless, their voice continued to echo through the alleys of East Village as one of the strangest spiritual experiences in the city. Since its emergence in the 1980s, the True Inner Light Temple has faced complex legal questions. U.S. law prohibits the distribution of most hallucinogenic substances, such as DPT and LSD, classifying them under Schedule 1 of controlled substances. However, the Constitution protects freedom of belief and religious rituals. This contradiction placed the temple in a gray area between religion and crime. The local press played a significant role in shining a light on the temple. In 1988, reports were published describing the place as a church offering drugs as God, and noted that members were distributing DPT as part of a religious ceremony. This coverage caught the attention of authorities, but it did not lead to direct closure. The main reason was that the temple had clearly declared itself as a religion. Its published statements repeatedly asserted that hallucinogens were not just a means, which posed a dilemma for the authorities. Should they treat it as a criminal organization or as a religion entitled to practice its rituals? Some researchers pointed out that the temple benefited from legal precedents that granted some religious sects the right to use certain substances in their rituals, such as the use of peyote by the Native American Church. But the difference here was fundamental. Peyote is a sacred plant with a long history in indigenous cultures, while DPT is a synthetic substance created in chemical laboratories. Nevertheless, there were no significant raids on the temple during that period. The police were aware of its existence, but the limited number of members and the lack of direct complaints made the case less of a priority. The temple thus lived on the margins, neither officially recognized nor facing complete repression. The debate extended into the academic sphere. Some religious scholars saw the temple as an extreme example of what is known as drug religions, which emerged in the 1960s and 1970s. Others viewed it simply as a cover to justify the use of prohibited substances. These intellectual divisions added to the temple's ambiguous image in society. As the 1990s arrived, the temple remained in existence but was surrounded by doubt. Its presence was not a secret, but it also did not become a widespread movement. The law encircled it like fire, but this fire never fully ignited. Its followers lived in a dangerous zone, relatively protected by religious freedom, yet always threatened by drug laws. By the beginning of the 1990s, the presence of the temple began to gradually fade. The number of members had remained limited from the start, and the majority of those interested in hallucinogenic substances preferred to use them in personal or cultural contexts, away from the strict religious character imposed by the temple. Political and legal changes during that time made it more difficult for them to continue. The war on drugs, launched by the U.S. government in the 1980s and 1990s, made any activity related to banned substances a direct target for surveillance. While the authorities did not conduct an overt campaign to shut down the temple, the new legal environment prompted many members to step away. Additionally, many observers considered the movement's reliance on banned substances like DPT and LSD to expose its followers to legal and health risks, which negatively impacted its continuity. In an environment where these substances were prohibited, it was not easy to practice rituals freely or promote the doctrine publicly. Furthermore, the temple's lack of a clear dissemination strategy or an approach to adapt its teachings to the cultural and political shifts in modern society led to its isolation. Over time, the number of active members dwindled, and events and activities faded away. as the temple lacked a strong organizational or leadership structure. This made it heavily reliant on a limited number of individuals who passionately embraced the doctrine but lacked the capacity to sustain or spread it institutionally. Reports about the temple in the media became less frequent over time. By the end of the 1990s, it had virtually no media presence. Even its headquarters in the East Village quietly disappeared, as if swallowed by the bustling city. Today, there are no signs of ongoing activity under this name, except for a few online references to old texts or personal testimonies from former members. Some researchers argue that the temple did not end in the literal sense, but rather dissolved into the broader currents of spiritual drug culture. Core ideas, such as viewing hallucinogenic substances as a gateway or even an embodiment of the sacred, continued in other movements. However, they were no longer directly associated with the name True Inner Light Temple. Conclusion: the story of the True Inner Light Temple cannot be reduced to a small shop or a limited group of followers. It is part of a broader history witnessed in America, a history of attempts to search for the sacred outside traditional institutions. Although the temple as an entity has disappeared, its intellectual impact remains present. It reveals how a small group can boldly redefine the sacred and how the boundaries between religion, science, and law are not fixed, but always open for renegotiation. In the end, the temple leaves us with an open question. If a person is capable of seeing the inner light through a chemical molecule, does this light come from the substance itself or from within our consciousness, which is constantly searching for the divine? Stay with us until the end. And don't forget to support us by liking the video and subscribing to the channel for all the latest updates.